Am I
Hello,
on?
everybody. Yes, we are. We're live.
Okay.
All right, so all of you have probably gotten to know Konstantin pretty well up to this point. He has been a superstar in this virtual conference thus far, and he also has another panel in the day.
Yeah.
So yeah, he will be talking about how to acquire stake, the different profiles of the different actors in this community. So Konstantin, take it away.
Yeah, hey, sorry that you see my face again. I'm going to try and keep it interesting. I've adjusted. I had a presentation that was fairly technical. I kind of feel like you've heard that there's been a bunch of folks that talked a lot about how to build a technically valuable and compliant validator. And so what I'm trying to talk about a little bit, and I'm going to try and share my screen, is how to actually physically, engage with the community and become someone who can actually, kind of become a validator in a network and attract stake, and how to actually pick a network you should operate with. And so let me see if I can do this correctly. Here we go. All right, so. Okay, your screen sharing. Hover here to hide. Okay, so can you guys see, are you guys seeing my little screen here? Okay, great. Okay, perfect. So I'm the founder of Blockdaemon. Our tagline is "We Know Nodes," and we're a venture-backed entity in the space. Really, what that means is I'm going to show it to you. We're a blockchain infrastructure and infrastructure platform, and on the blockchain side, that means that we deploy 30+ protocols, and we're a hybrid cloud platform. Initially, you can deploy a bunch of different nodes with a credit card across a lot of different platforms. We support public and permissioned networks. We have on-prem and off-prem solutions. We run our own data centers. We also build a bunch of tooling around infrastructure. And we also offer platform services that are a lot more SLA monitoring, all that type of stuff. And we work with some of the larger entities in the space. Doesn't mean we're the smartest people. It just means that we have experience, and we've had a lot of things go wrong over time. And so we're still around to tell the tale, and long may it continue. And so I don't want to shill ourselves too much, but I do want to highlight also that when we talk about nodes and stuff, it's important to understand that there's a lot of different types per nodes in networks, and validators are one type of node. And so we operate and provide nodes for a lot of different node types as well, right? And so, but if you think about blockchain and validation, ultimately is submitting transactions into a chain and then approving them, and actually, kind of carving them into the block history of a chain. And that's something that is one of the more common and probably the main use case. The other one is data-related activity and kind of following those transactions and seeing what goes on. That's really all blockchains do. The main difference between all the different bits and protocols you hear is mostly around the definition of consensus, and then how they scale consensus over the explosive network proliferation. And so there's some machine spec differences, but those are really the core differences when you look at projects. And so I do want to I don't want to talk about our stuff actually too much. Let's dive right in here. What I want to allude to is that one of the things that we think makes us a little different, we approach the market from a protocol partnership program. And so what that means is that we're trying to work with foundations directly early on when they start building test nets, and develop tooling according to their life cycle, so that the tooling and the things we offer look different when a network has 10 nodes to when it has 100 to 1,000 or 10,000. So when we currently work with companies like, the ones sort of, kind of stake-offs, like the Cielos, Oasis Labs, or, Kusamas, the tooling looks different than a Tezos, which maybe is at the sort of 1,000 node layer, where it's much more interesting to have Infura type API services, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's sort of how we're a little differentiated. And so anyway, so you know a little bit about us. So the thing we're talking about here is how you start building stake. So one of the things I would say, it's important to understand what POS system is and does. Because I'm a big decentralization guy, and I run a node business, which might be an oxymoron, but I do believe that decentralized control is important. I do believe that networks like Bitcoin actually achieved it to a good extent, and I do believe that POS systems are still troubled when it comes to that. And so the way POS systems are structured ultimately is to make the largest attack factor the one who would suffer economically the most if they would choose to do so. So a POS system is engineered in a way where you want the 51% attack, which is somehow, however you define it, hash power token, the guys who can control the consensus in a and dictate which transaction make it into a block, that they would be penalized in a way, for example, via slashing, that they would lose the most money. And so it's not a problem for a POS system in its setup to actually have 50% of the tokens on one node, in theory, right? And so because the 50% token holder and his one node are not incentivized to break the network because they would lose a lot of money. And so that's really kind of the core principle. And so so lots of POS networks face the a race towards centralization around large individual nodes which are owned by large holders. And so when you think about how to generate stake, that's important because you need to understand that the ecosystem you will offer and run a node in will have to compete with nodes that are managed and run by investors who might have, invested $50 million in an early token sale and sit on enormous token allocations. And so so it's important to understand what you're getting involved in. And the key challenge for all these proof of stake networks is, can they successfully reward and entice the node community while satisfying security requirements? And so we've talked in other talks a little bit about that. And often you'll find that mainnets and protocols specifically early on will get pushed more and more into centralized setups because their version of slashing is a faulty mainnet launch and a token that gets dumped aggressively because of it. And so these networks are under enormous pressure to launch mainnets, and managing and launching a qualitative, truly decentralized network is quasi-impossible unless you started with something like Bitcoin, right? And so you can't have that big bang sort of Genesis block and a mainnet and kind of stake distributed and everything working perfectly if you run a totally decentralized setup. So it's a progressive game, so it's a decentralization is really a philosophical concept at most, and ideally it's something that's achieved over a large time horizon, which means that if you get engaged and want to run a validator, you need to understand those economics, which is that there's going to be large stakers and participants in the market who are having the benefits of some centralized support. And so that said, these networks, and ideally we're talking about the great projects here, they're super passionate about what they do. Yes, they funded the initial research by selling tokens to large investors, but they also want to have people build tooling so that people can connect and ideally have decentralized down the line in the network. And so for them, it's a really, really big challenge and question on how they can really reward community actors over a longer time horizon. And so what all these networks want to avoid, or should want to avoid, is that it's the stakeholders over time are just exchanges and custodians, and not people who are actually building utility in this particular in the network of their choice. And so all these foundations are thinking about that stuff, but it is a balance between getting something to mainnet. And so what does that mean when you kind of think about starting your little validator business? And so how do you pick a project you should work with? And I'm just going to share some learnings. And again, this is totally up. This is by no means the best way to do it. But the big thing for us always was, do we really love it? And does it solve a real problem? And so for us, we need to feel passionately about the project we work with and we put in our marketplace. We operate a node marketplace on our website. You can go there There's a node marketplace. There's around 26 projects listed. 20 of those are platformed, where you can actually deploy nodes, connect, and learn about the projects without talking to us. Others, you do need to talk to us, depending on where they are in the life cycle. But we actually source and look at those really, really carefully. And I'm going to talk about the categories that we look at when we actually decide to work with a project. But first off, I would always say that you do need it really helps if you believe in it. And it's makes you it just aligns you with the long-term incentive of the project. The other really big question for us, obviously, is it economically viable and backed by signal investors? And that's a little bit of a sad statement, but we've learned that we've started in our history, we've built networks for projects that were technically absolutely magnificent and raised very little money and didn't have enough funds to really entice an ecosystem. The sad truth in our industry still is that the technical solution doesn't win. The solution wins that has enough capital at its disposal to grow and iterate and induce a healthy ecosystem. And so looking at the investor landscape of these projects is very, very important. So is the token distribution early. And so what you want to avoid are projects where too much of the token, where the foundation isn't sitting on a large enough reserve to actually run a treasury over a complex and long life cycle. And so it's important to understand what that looks like. The actual tech, does it actually work? Is the consensus mechanism workable? Does it scale? I can't tell you how important that is. We found it so fascinating when we worked with all these different projects, like reading a white paper and actually building a decentralized mainnet and operate it are very, very, things that aren't necessarily correlated. So projects that, might have great investors regarded super highly, but on the technical core infrastructure level, have really, really big performance issues. And I'm not going to name names, but that's definitely something we've seen. We like open source stuff. You want to check if they use open source tooling. You want to make sure they don't have a preferred nation clause with any tooling providers like us, for example. You want to make sure that it's a competitive marketplace and that a lot of validators are able to participate early on, mostly because a lot of the value is distributed very early in these networks. And so if there's one disproportionately large entity in early sucking up a lot of the knowledge and the value, it's going to be very hard for you to compete with it over time. And so the other question is, can you be a relevant stakeholder? Doesn't mean just tokens, but one way is to reach out to investors who made investments, who might want help operating a node. That's how we got started in the staking world. And is there a way for you to stand out somehow? And so it's important to kind of think about what is your angle there a little bit. And then the other thing I would say is that the more time you'll see between raise and mainnet launch, the higher the odds are that the founding team is incentivized by maybe not so great factors, meaning that investors are probably going to pressurize them to provide a liquidity event, and they're going to start to cut corners or maybe make deals in order to launch something and achieve that for their investors that might not be in the interest of the wider network and validator community. And so that's also something we kind of take a look at. That's one of the metrics we like to think about. It's not a complete picture always, but it's a good way to think about what happens. And so let me see how to pick a project. So here we're here. And then if you what are funds looking for when they think about potentially running a validator? Oops, sorry guys, I got lost here for a second. So most funds that are potentially thinking about connecting to a validator in terms of brand and stuff, they're really looking for security. I think the biggest bottleneck for most of the institutional investors to participate in staking is the fear of slashing, because for legal reasons, they can never really put their principal at risk. And so you'll see a lot of funds being very, very nervous around slashing, which you'll understand if you imagine you have a $25 million investment and you're kind of like, hey, if I get slashed 5% of that, that's actually a significant amount of money that might outweigh the benefits of me earning inflationary rewards on this. And so security is a key component, and security is a factor of many different things. This is, I think if you want to operate a validator and you want to talk to institutional investors to run it, it's good if you're SOC compliant, if you have insurance. Ideally, you probably need to even have a colo somewhere, maybe outside of the US, failovers, customer support. And so kind of sort of understand what you're getting into if you deal with the investor community. The investor community can put you on the map really quickly because obviously they hold large stakes, and these stakes can push you into these networks relatively easily. And so, but there's a barrier of entry here that's relatively high. It's probably the only way you get into a network later. And so, this is something not for the not for the faint-hearted, for sure. And so I want to, put that out there. And then what are actually the foundations themselves looking for in a validator? And why are they interested in working with folks here? So they want to launch a mainnet that works, which means it never needs to rebalance, it never has a hard fork, and it does what it says on the label. And so and so it's, sometimes their interest isn't necessarily aligned with the validator interest, which is in order to ensure that the network doesn't get rebalanced or experience hard forks, it's much better for them to work with trusted parties first. And so they want to get key stakeholders involved that are heavily vested to not screw with them early on. And so again, that goes to the point of you should try and be early and find alignment with some of the larger stakeholders. They are all interested in tooling that helps people over time to stake and participate easier. You'll see that if you look at the grants that are given out by all of the projects that have been around for a little longer, Tezos, Cosmos, there's public records available. I think that's a great exercise if you're interested in the space, to kind of sort of review what these grant programs pay projects tokens for tooling to be built. And you'll see that there's certain things that are pretty ubiquitous. And then they want to also make sure that the tokens don't get dumped and they fall into a sort of economical quagmire that kind of impacts their ability to focus on building stuff. And so that's another thing that is something that they will think about quite a bit in order to ensure that they actually have a market dynamic that's healthy and allows for them to kind of function. And so there's been projects who, for example, what happens if you get the token economics wrong early, and you launch a mainnet and you see that the token economics and reward systems are off, it's very, very hard to reel that in. And so they're very careful around thinking about those different incentive mechanisms. And so similar, like investors, they like to work with people that they can trust. And so trust is in our trust business, I always say that for an industry operating in trust, we're a pretty trustless bunch. It takes a while to kind of build relationships and build trust in this particular space. And so sources for stakes for new participants, I'm going to try and come to an end here because there's been a lot of talk already. But if you're looking to figure out how to get in, research the projects you want to support, compare protocols, look at the different machine setups, so you understand the underlying cost structure of running infrastructure on it, and then make sure you understand the economics. What I mean with that is, you can go to our website. We actually list machine specs for all these most of the projects, because then you can actually do your own research and see what's the minimum stake required in order to be live on those networks, and does the minimum stake yield sufficient return for you to pay for the machine, right? So kind of sort of the math 101. Be early is important. I don't know how to say it any way differently. It's compounded interest just helps, right? And so the earlier you are, the more money you'll earn over time. And so it's a little bit like your pension fund. If you start paying in your pension when you're 50, it's it's going to be a lot harder than when you do it when you're 20, for example. Not, but, you should be doing that. You should buy Bitcoin for your pension fund, but nevertheless, it does matter. Really participate in the respective community once you find one you like. They all have Discord riots. There's a bunch of websites. It's actually relatively easy to stand out and build a reputation. And so it's actually very easy for you to build a rapport with the community, mostly because the key thing is that there's a lot less people building on these things than projects necessarily like to show. And so let's say there's maybe 100 super active devs, maybe 200, 300 in a community that sort of stand out. It's not that hard to stand out if you actually take the time, read the papers, try to participate, and build a reputation in there. And then kind of start to participate in bug programs, interact with the community, maybe buy a couple of tokens, stake them against a larger validator just to kind of see what happens. I think that's super, super helpful, and get a feeling for it. And then when you do engage, use open source stuff. Super important for a lot of different reasons. Be public about how great and open sourcey you are. It helps, but it's really an important architectural decision you should make very early. And then apply for grants. And so all these projects have grants, and you can actually, as I said, kind of define something you might be able to build and actually get some free tokens, and actually build up enough stake so you can participate in the respective staking networks, and then ideally grow over time and become a trusted and loved entity in the space. And so those are the sort of core bits on how to go about building a stake and understanding the different stakeholders in the stake. And so I'm gonna go back here and see if there's any questions. Let me just go in there. Other things than tools like marketing, etc. So the question was if there's a way for a validator to stand out by provide other tools. I think, it would depend on the type of marketing you can provide. I think all projects like when their developer ecosystem growth, because they all have too few developers building active things over time, right? And so any exposure you can give a project, I think, is probably seen as something that they will or might not, might reward. I think a lot of people found it very valuable to just write high quality content blog posts around whatever, kind of their remote key signing systems, all that type of stuff. What I would say at this point is that a lot of people do this and pay people to do it, right? And so companies like us kind of have a little bit of a process to do that. And so I do think really the best way to do it is to start engaging. All these projects also normally have ambassador programs. So on the marketing side, you can also become an ambassador. For example, I'm an ambassador in Polkadot. That was super helpful. There's a process that they take you through, but it allows me to access and organize meetups in a particular territory for them, which again is a great marketing tool for us to also highlight our services. And so that's one way you can do it. And so new market participants, how to get involved in management of these nodes. As I said, ultimately you got to run a node. What I always say, and frankly, if you're in this space and you're learning about proof of stake, I do want to highlight that the best thing you can do still for all of us is run a Bitcoin node. We maybe have 5,000 fully updated Bitcoin nodes live as of now. The network isn't actually as well distributed as we would like. And so if you want to build some credibility in the network, help us run Bitcoin nodes. And so you can do that via our website. There's other tools as well. But if you're interested in crypto and you're interested in participating in these networks, I don't think you can be necessarily wrong by starting how to learn how to run a Bitcoin node. And Bitcoin is sort of the giant on which shoulders we all stand. And so I think that's something I would definitely urge anyone to do who's interested in that you're interested in. I have another question around recommend announcing open source projects that we create. I think Twitter is definitely the most used sort of advertising tool, and then respective Discord channels and of projects as well. And so again, you got to get nitty gritty. You got to get in there. And then there's a bunch of different whatever little crypto news outlets and stuff. But nothing beats building an actual community and engaging with it and making friends and doing what you love. I got a question about the Brave browser. I love Brave, man. Great project. We're talking to Brave all the time, kind of trying to figure out how to participate in the network. It's definitely one of the projects where we feel blockchain adds real value, and we love everything they do. So I leave it at that. Unfortunately, we're not currently running nodes for them, but that might change. Shared nodes and personal nodes. Something on our idiosyncrasy around our website. Personal nodes are full nodes that only you control. They sit. There's tooling that allows you to run the node however you see fit. A shared node is something for folks who want to collect, kind of play around, extract data. When you use Infura for Ethereum, really what you do is you connect to a shared node. And so that's really the main difference. For folks starting, you can sign up to a shared node, collect an Electron wallet, put in a couple of Satoshis, learn about Bitcoin, and then start investigating the POS networks that you think make the biggest difference. Bitcoin is always your entry ticket, so you can't go wrong with that. If you are, I'm thinking if there's any other question there to reach crypto users, particularly stakers. Anyway, Brave's great. I think for us, it's been always, it's another project that started fairly early. A lot of the early days projects, and we've had a couple of them that we really like, they didn't really think about how to build a node economy necessarily. That's a lot more prevalent in the POS world, where the returns are much clearer. And so a lot of these networks are now thinking about how to work with companies like us in order to build tooling and entice validator communities to come. One of the things I would say is we have a fairly large university program. We run validator nodes for foundations and for universities. And so if you're an academic or a university, you can also reach out to us. We have programs where we actually have funding to fund validator nodes from projects. And universities can run free nodes and earn yield return. And so there's different projects like that. Haven't really used Reddit as an acquisition channel. We have a label there. We tried typing around. I think it really depends who the individual is who operates it. I think the commercial Reddit channels are tricky. I actually don't know how public I can be. There's certain large ones in Europe, the Frankfurt School, I can be public about, just because in our node agreements, when somebody purchases a node, it's always private. But I'd say that you can do your own math. We're one of the official infrastructures partners of Xpring. Ripple actually has the largest university program, so they pay a lot of universities to run validators, and so we're part of that group. And then we're foundation partners of a lot of the newer projects in getting larger universities onboarded on these projects. And because we have this sort of validator as a service business model, we interact with quite a few of them, just because we believe that universities are great network custodians. And so we think that makes a lot of sense. Those are people that should be running nodes on all the major networks, because they have ideally the right incentive to be vested in a particular network. And so, yeah, so half an hour is up. Let me see, how long was this scheduled? If there are no more questions, I'm gonna stop here, I guess. Oops, wait a minute. How long did I have? 7:15. So let me see if there's any more questions. you want to give folks a bio break, guys, or?
Yeah, I think that might be a good idea. We've been going at this for quite a while now.
Yeah, totally. Okay, great. Well, listen, I appreciate it. Blockdemon.com. You can reach out to us. We have a chat. We have a Twitter account. You can email me, Konstantin with a K. So I'm going to put my email in here. You can spam me if you want. It's public anyway. And ask questions. Run a Bitcoin node. And participate in this, amazing new technology. All right. Bye, guys.
Once people
Great. Thank you so much, Konstantin. It's been great having you. And we look forward to seeing you later in the day.
Okay, great. Bye, guys.
Great. Thanks. So thank you, everyone, for participating up to now. We are going to take about a 12-minute break. And next we have, let's see, who do we got next? Next we have, meet all the protocols. So there, nope. Yep. So Celo, Coda, Scale, for Thea, and Matic. It's going to be very exciting. So stick around, and we will see you soon.